We're in Lakewood, Colorado, on Wednesday, June 16, I believe, 1976. And Jim Allender and I are talking about his experiences in the labor movement, and with special reference to the autobiography of John Brophy called A Miner's Life. And I think you had occasion, Jim, to read a few of the chapters or pages of this.
I did, and I got certain reactions.
Okay.
You asked me a question about Lewis's distrust of Brophy. The big thing is Brophy was a threat to the existence of Lewis. His whole regime was predicated on the power of Lewis.
Now you're speaking of at what point? Obviously he was an enemy earlier in the 20s because he had a district base.
Well, that
all
goes
that,
back to 1918, 1919, when Brophy came into the picture.
At what stage would your own involvement with any of the things that Brophy's telling about bump into his? You were not, or were you active in the 1926 UMW election campaign?
No.
Okay. No. You had earlier worked in the coal industry, but at that
point... Well, I
worked
in the coal industry, but
I'm trying to pick up when you...
UMWA was ineffective from 1925, 1926. We worked under open shop conditions till the wobbly strike
in the West.
Yeah, and
well, a good bit of even Appalachia the Union had been destroyed as well, hadn't it?
Oh, sure. Union was on the decline.
Did you find anything remarkable, like how uneven this history is in a factual sense? It's like, did you wonder whether the guy Hall who put it together from maybe something 10 times longer and without always, like there's almost no mention of West Virginian places, the focus is so local.
Talking about the Brophy book, there's a lot of history left out, ignored. There were highlights in what I call the development of a movement.
Well, why don't you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, I read that part about 26, 27, and the role Alec Campbell played in that whole period is ignored.
Tell me about Alec Campbell.
Well, he was a militant, very aggressive organizer.
Where was he based?
West Virginia, Pennsylvania. He was very active in the creation of the Save the Union movement. These movements weren't formed without something from below. They had to have some kind of a base.
Yes. Okay. What was Alec Campbell? Is not a name I know. What? Would you close that as you go on? Where did he come out of? Do you know where he worked, or do you remember anything of his
As
background?
near as I know,
Mhm.
and I can't back this up, he came out of the Cannonsburg area.
Hmm. And therefore, you also told me the guy that I should look up, you remember in the earlier interview, and that would be around Cleveland, I think, today. Who was,
Tony Minerich.
right. He was out of that area.
Yeah, he was active in the Save the Union movement.
Mhm.
He was very active in National Miners Union.
Mhm.
And he helped carry the whole thing back into UMWA.
Mhm. Was
that-
Campbell around during that period?
No,
as well?
Campbell was assassinated.
I see. When? What happened to him?
He was murdered by company thugs.
Where and what?
I can't,
You remember it happening?
yeah, it happened in western Pennsylvania.
Mhm. What? How rough were conditions then? Were they? How brutal were the camps like? How would you describe them that you
Well,
went out of?
Western Pennsylvania, I can't tell you, because my life was in Colorado.
Mhm.
And the whole thing, going back to 22, when they made the agreement, 8-hour day, $1 an hour, and you have to remember, from 22 to 25, this was arbitrarily cut to 5.25 a day. Well, you cut the living standard that far. The big difference.
Right.
And that was a festering sore. Plus, the more the grievances accumulated, the more dissatisfied the miner become. He suffered. His family suffered.
You were telling me at one point of the differences you observed in what might account for the background of men like Brophy and some of the English trained miners. Why don't you discuss that a minute?
Well,
I'll give you this. Go ahead. You know, you were comparing the different ethnic groups in their
I've studied
politicalization.
over. I had to contend with it.
Mm-hmm.
The 27th strike.
Mm-hmm.
I had come up in the family of a miner from 1913, and you get to know different personalities. And I think when we got to 27, the period you're speaking about, you can distinguish between those who come from the old Scotch, English, socialist background, from those who came out of Italy, who came out of Greece.
Try and talk a minute, man.
Okay.
You had the distinction between what I would term the I wouldn't say ultra, the conservative philosophy of the trade unionism of the British Isles compared to the anarcho-syndicalism that you'll meet in the Mediterranean area. And while they got along beautiful, for example, Louis Tychus in the Ludlow strike, he led them all. He understood these philosophies. He was a peacemaker and kept them in motion.
Well, what else was going on in 26 to 30 that you feel contributed to further confusion besides this ethnic thing?
Well,
Like the companies were so rough, what else was...
I read excerpts of Brophy's book of that period, and I think he ignores a number of very fundamental, what'll I say, conflicts, contradictions,
Sure.
and I wouldn't accuse Brophy of being an opportunist, but he was caught, what'll I say,
Yeah.
in the middle of the politics of that movement, and he ignores completely in his book the pressures, for example, on Pat Toohey, and the movement at that time, well, I say, it went out of the way with the idea of controlling John Brophy or keeping him in line with the period of that time. And that was influenced. There were two things. The thing going on between Brophy and the movement, and
And
the
you're speaking of the left movement.
thing going on within the left movement.
Okay.
He
That's
ign-
what I want you to talk. First, he definitely underplays the whole role of the left, which was
Oh,
enormous,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
In general, in any way you want to.
Well, if it hadn't been for the left-wing movement, there would have been no Brophy in
Right.
that period.
So he ignores that, and then he either doesn't understand the way others in the movement would have the conflicts that he told me were going on in the.
Well, for example, within the communist movement,
Yeah.
there were the followers of Foster
Uh-huh.
and Lovestone. Lovestone crowd poured all kinds of money into that movement. In fact, if it hadn't been for their support, that April 1st meeting in Pittsburgh, 1928,
Yeah.
they were back of that hill. I remember when I come in there, they not only greeted me, jumped on me, and I was flabbergasted what the hell it was all about. Took me a while.
Yeah. All right, let me see if I understand, because these are not things I think that are, down anywhere where people understand them, except those
Well,
who were in it.
it's ancient
But
history.
who were there particular miners who were under Lovestone influence at that point who were?
Well, I can't quite remember. Tom Myerscough was one
All
who
right.
played an important role.
He later became the president of the National Miners Union.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they printed a paper at that time,
Mm-hmm.
but within that was the politics of this inner struggle
Yeah.
going on. And Brophy, Powers Hapgood,
Mm-hmm.
and them were, what'll I say, in conflict with it.
Yeah.
But they didn't have, how'll I put it, the audacity to put forth their own position.
Okay. What was the effect of some of these struggles within the communist movement? How would it affect? Like, what was Pat Toohey's role at this point? Was he?
Well, personally, I have a great deal, well, I say, not affection, but affinity for Pat Toohey. I admired him, but he was a victim of inner politics. And
Tell me how that would work.
well, for example, in this relationship with Brophy, Powers Hapgood, behind Powers Hapgood was Mary Donovan. And how to cope with that, you see. And we're looking back at history, quarterbacking now.
Right.
If Pat hadn't been so bound with these inner politics,
Yeah.
I think he could have been more objective in coping with Brophy and his kind. They were typical throughout the coal camps.
Yeah.
They didn't have to be Brophy's.
But in other words, there could have been a better unity
Oh, sure.
if some of the inner communist politics hadn't interfered in working with some of these people. At times they would,
Well, it was a
pressure.
clash. It was a conflict.
okay, almost the political competition between Foster and Lovestone followers
Yeah, that
is that what you would hear
that's
saying?
what I was saying. Disrupted good thinking
All right, yeah,
and good.
yeah. And do you think this continued through the Save the Union movement and then into the National Miners Union?
Oh, it was a carryover.
Yeah. So that it's a sad fact that after the UMW almost disintegrates in the early 30s, and the National Miners Union is a real force, it itself has collapsed or something almost by the time
Well,
the Section 7A NRA comes along.
I'll put it this way. There were a period there, the National Miners Union, it came to the top.
Yeah,
It was accepted by the miners.
yeah.
Conditions were, what'll I say, deplorable isn't the word.
They were a horror, no question. It was just pure hunger.
Yeah. And the National Miners Union prevailed. And out here in, New Mexico, the Gallup strike. In Utah, the Helper strike. In those strikes, Pat Toohey played a role.
Those were NMU-led strikes?
Yeah.
both of them?
Helper.
What year was Helper, do you remember? Was it
I would say 32, 33.
Right.
But Charlie Gwynn
Mhm.
was the leader in that strike, was a good movement, very effective. And these were people who come out of Pennsylvania, Ohio, give leadership to the strike.
Right.
Later on, Gwynn was very effective in carrying the NMU back into UMWA.
Where was he located at that point? When
Helper,
he
Utah.
remained in that area?
Yeah. He came out of Ohio.
How do you spell his last name? He's not a name I'm familiar with either. Crick?
Gwynn.
Gwynn.
Yeah.
What experiences did you personally have in connection with the size of the following? Like, you went into the western Pennsylvania area, you got to see the heartland at one point, you spent some time there, did you not, as an organizer?
Well, this is later years.
Oh, I see, later.
Yeah.
You would have been more in a political
Yeah.
role watching with
Yeah.
miners. Okay. At this period, you were simply attending from the West as a delegate, more or less.
To the 28th
Okay.
Save the Union Convention.
Okay. The Save the Union was the Pittsburgh one in April, was it?
April 1928.
All right. That was one highlight.
Yeah.
Then Brophy in his book, I think, and I don't know whether, I assume this is factual, indicates that he he pulls out, I think, of the Save the Union movement.
Yeah, after that April 28th meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
He also indicates that by September 1928, I assume these facts are generally correct, the communists, as he put it, gave up their effort to bore from within
And
the UNW and called a convention which formed the dual
the National Miners Union.
Now, part of that is also the changes in the communist line, are they not, that are
Well,
or are they all internal developments?
Reflecting back, I remember Cleveland, they held what they called the TUUL convention.
Was that in between these two?
Well, it's the period you're speaking about,
Yes,
1928.
Mhm.
I was a delegate at that
Mhm.
convention. And that was the groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
Put together
Mm-hmm.
what constituted the National Miners Union.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did the NMU have some capable trade unionists aside from the politics? in your
I would
experience?
say yes. There was Borich, Pittsburgh, District 5, Vic Kamenovich,
Mhm.
District 5, Pittsburgh. Well, you can name
Right.
them.
What was Pat Toohey's background? Was he a miner? Or
He was a miner who
Okay.
came out of Canonsburg
Mhm.
and into the movement. Very, what will I say, an aggressive individual.
Was Pat Toohey like out of the earliest socialist movement or out of syndicalist?
I couldn't tell you.
You don't know his earlier background?
No, I
Okay.
couldn't tell you. I do know he's married to a Jewish girl out of New York, Fanny. Maybe I shouldn't say this, a very domineering, influential over the life of Pat. And I think that determined a lot of Pat's politics.
Mhm. You think, in effect, he might have,
Personally, I couldn't stand her.
right,
I met her in the 28th convention, Save the Union
Yeah.
movement.
right. And you think if he had been more independent himself, he might have played a greater role of...
That I couldn't say.
That's hard to speculate.
That's
We've seen that enough.
you got to look into the inner works of the individual.
Right. What, is it appropriate, or would you care to comment on whether later in your opportunities politically you ever got to see miners in other lands or anywhere, or were your experiences pretty much, political,
Well-
theoretical, rather than having the opportunity of...
No, I'm a minor.
Yeah.
born in a mining camp, raised in a mining camp, and the only difference is, I've seen mines both in Germany, in Russia.
That's what I'd like you to tell me about.
I've,
because I've never been to those.
Well, I can't compare, and I'll tell you why.
You went underground in these places?
Yes.
You didn't work, but you observed, you spent a day?
Sure,
That type of thing. Okay.
I spent time discussing with,
Yeah.
for example, a young Russian
Mm-hmm.
who dissatisfied with conditions.
Yeah.
And I remember discussing with him, okay, it's going to get better. What you're doing now is
Yeah.
for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, but simple things needled him, see. But it parted we, you know.
Right.
But to me, the mode of mining compared to what I was used to,
Mhm.
they were working one long pillar,
Yeah.
and hell, we went in there, subdivided it into rooms,
Mhm.
worked it out from the center, and caved it back. Well, that was, well, let's say it was Greek to them. I tried to
Do you
explain it.
think theirs was a more primitive?
Well, hell, it
No
was
question.
European mining compared to
Yeah.
what we had there in the States was primitive.
What about the height of the seams? Even when the seams...
Oh, well, they had very high.
So with good seams, that wasn't the reason. It wasn't
No.
good seams. It was rather the style and the engineering approach.
The whole primitive way of taking it out from underground.
Had they, by the time you got over there, already was undercutting and mechanization of that sort already in effect, or were they more primitive at that?
Still primitive.
They were still drilling, and they weren't undercutting even.
Well,
I was just saying with
They
with power.
didn't, they were doing it with picks.
Right.
In,
Instead of machine cutting. Okay.
well, we'd use the old
Yeah.
puncher, the air machine,
Right.
electric, the Goodman, the Jeffrey,
Right. Right.
and hell,
And this was true in Germany and in Russia.
Germany, I didn't go underground.
You talked with German miners.
Well, World War II, outside of Dortmund,
Mhm.
we took over the whole area.
Yeah.
The coal mines were there.
Yeah.
I talked to miners
This is when you were there as a soldier.
as a soldier.
Okay. Mhm.
And, well, these people are never really for Hitler. They accepted it,
Mhm.
but they were basically the old socialist type German. And their conditions, I would say, were a higher level than what I had experienced in the Russian coal fields.
So
Russia at that time, they were introducing new coal cutters.
you're speaking now the early 1930s when you were in
Yes,
Russia and
that's right.
spending time there.
That's right.
And now you're talking of really of about 13 years later
Yeah,
or something. 14 years later.
World War II,
At the end of World War II in Germany.
45.
Could have been more mechanized by then in Russia, but we don't.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
But you think you never got to see the English mines or anything like
No.
that? You talked.
I met several English miners.
Yeah.
My father was Scotch, and over a lifetime you inherit what
Right.
your father, what he lived, what he experienced, comparing it
Mm-hmm.
to what we had in our way of living.
At what point, how far did you continue to keep, like, Brophy in his book talks about the Springfield, Illinois reorganization convention. Did you continue through all those movements, or did you?
No, I was not a part of the Progressive Miners.
Okay.
I had, what will I say, close contact,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew, two or three had come out of that movement.
You were you full-time for a while with the National Miners Union then?
Well, it was a volunteer thing.
Yeah.
They didn't have
They didn't have money for
money.
organizing.
You went out, my
Maybe Pat Tua, whoever was some
My-
national president might have been full-time, and that was about
Well,
it.
I questioned
Where
that.
would you go? What areas did you get to see and know intimately the strength and the size of the following in the National Miners Union?
Well, I'll start to say the union movement.
All right, go ahead.
I've left out completely the fact of the Wadley strike.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a milestone in miners' history,
Mhm.
because that strike brought into play people like Ellie Howitt out of
Mhm.
Kansas.
That was
Uh,
27, wasn't
yeah.
it? Yeah.
They seen in this thing, and while it was a bit spontaneous,
Mhm.
a revival of what had been in Ludlow.
Mhm. It was an inspiration to the workers at the depths of it.
Yeah,
The
they
Union
were.
was being destroyed, and
It,
it was a fight back.
that's right.
Mhm.
And I've said often, the time that I've been asked this question, how the miners subscribed to wobbly philosophy or joined the IWW. And I've answered, it's been the Salvation Army who offered them something better, some hope, a future,
Yeah.
they would have followed.
Right. The Wobblies, after all, in 27 had no base of significance anywhere. They'd lost their base.
Well,
But
they
came-
were on decline
Right,
nationally.
but they remarkably met the miners' needs, didn't they? And
Well,
what was that, Columbine? Was that what we're
well,
talking about? Or what was the?
you have to give credit to Embry.
Which Embry is this now? What he want initials, or is that the one I'm thinking of?
Well, he had initial, but
I forget, what was his nickname, or what do you call
Embry.
him? Okay.
The miners knew him as
Yeah,
Embry.
right. Mhm.
You see. And he had, it just come to mind, a guy like Paul, I can't think of his last name, Hungarian.
A Hungarian? Mhm.
Yeah,
All right.
he was a brilliant talker, a good organizer.
These were good agitators,
Yeah,
good
oh, yeah,
organizers.
yeah.
Were you at Columbine when they arrived there?
Well, they never arrived at Columbine. I'll tell you about that.
All right.
They went into southern Colorado,
Yeah.
and they put together enough. Started out with a protest strike
Yeah.
on the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti. And that was so effective, they set a date, as near as I remember, in October for a state.
How long did the workers go out for Sacco and Vanzetti in that
Oh,
protest?
2 or 3 days.
Do you think the Italian ethnic base was very important?
Well, that was
that,
that,
and the other workers rebelled with
Slavs
them. Yeah,
and the others.
yeah, they all regarded
They
as
were the-
anti-foreigner.
They were the background of that strike.
Okay.
And I think they set it for October. Well, anyway, I was working at the Columbine
Yeah.
when that strike was called.
Right.
We had an effective strike in the north. I'm speaking about northern Colorado.
Yes.
In the south, they employed every old tactic to break the
Right.
strike. They held a conference in southern Colorado. Emory and the most influential people in leadership were all arrested. I remember on the 20th of November, there was a meeting at Grace Church, and a number of the people who'd come in to replace Embry in that,
Yeah.
hell, they were way off the rocker. You know, the miners were talking about bread and butter. Why do we have to buy scrip
Yeah.
to buy groceries?
Right.
And I got up then to speak at that meeting.
Yeah.
It was namely trade unionists of the Denver movement. And our friend Josephine Roach was in the audience.
Yeah.
And I remember that
You remember her being there as a young woman?
very, very well. And I think back a lot of times in that strike.
Wasn't the Columbine her property? I mean,
It was her
belonged to
property.
the Rocky Mountain Fuel.
Yeah. If there'd been any common sense there, the operators would give the miners a slight pay increase, and there'd been no conflict.
Yeah.
But I returned home to Lafayette. I woke up about 5 in the morning with a buzz overhead. Governor Adams had turned out the National Guard, and they were flying planes and whatnot. I remember my mother came in and woke me, says, "My boys are on the picket line." Well, I got up. The old man and I took off for the Columbine. And knowing the gates, knowing a guy we'd known for years standing there with a shotgun. Well, we went in, and they had Adam Bell, strike leader. He had been beaten. He was, and I went over and talked. He was under arrest. And this was an area, the main road to post office, closed off by thugs, by Colorado State Police. Lou Sheriff, who was the right-hand man to Governor Adams. And I moved around freely, and I run into a little stooge, Evan Jones.
Mm-hmm.
He picked me out. I was arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And after being held a day in Columbine, I was taken to Greeley by Wyatt, deputy sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
No reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think of today, they got to
Yeah. Not them, huh?
read you your your rights.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent time up in the Greeley jail. Well, I'd say coupled with that whole thing, I have to tell you about the picket line. Now, if you could find
Yeah.
the proceedings on that hearing,
Mm-hmm.
no one will tell you who fired the first shot.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to blame it on the miners.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother Kel,
Yeah.
who was in the front line of the picket, he said Bud Wyatt fired the first shot.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 of them were killed right there in the picket line. Among them was a young kid, Jerry Davis. He wasn't even 20, but he was on the picket line.
Mm-hmm.
And his old man's history goes back to 13 in the period before that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the things you're telling me now, as well as in the earlier discussion we had, Jim, are fascinating, and I don't know whether you'd care to share as well impressions that are sort of lost in the New Deal, in which you were a part when what I'm thinking of is, and by comparison I'd like you to comment, is what I'm told, like in West Virginia, how the mood after the miners got organized,
Yeah,
the political mood, you know, like into 36,
yeah.
even though they were for Roosevelt, they had been so, what would you say, more politicized than other sections of the workers. And I didn't know whether you haven't seen this photograph of you recently, whether you'd care to, you know, comment on what it was like in those 30s politically, because you were a real political left figure in those years after you, I think you told me you'd been to the Soviet Union and you were a
I was
communist activist at this point.
Yes, I came to Pittsburgh as, what'll I say, second organizational secretary, educational director.
What year would that have been?
That would be in the fall of 1933.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of things. It was full of contradictions, but there was a movement of force.
Now the workers are, the miners are organized,
They were,
but the steel workers are not. It's an uneven thing, right?
the miners were not completely
Oh,
organized.
that's right, because the steel, the captive miners were in
Well, there were the captives. You had
Polka, and there were
the old NMU movement.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't trust what Roosevelt said.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't fully.
Mm-hmm.
You have to picture this thing.
Go ahead and give me that picture, 'cause I don't even
They
know that coming into it when I did,
they
I grasped all that at all.
distrusted Lewis. They hated the guts of Mike Tighe.
The head of the steel.
Steel unit.
The pre-steel.
Yeah. Well, there were a hell of a lot of them there. And it was a turbulent period.
Western Pennsylvania was remarkably turbulent, wasn't
Oh,
it? Almost in the whole U.S.
Yeah.
picture.
And I recall in that period, the whole thing was to bring the old NMU followers into the UMWA, accept Lewis, accept the future. And on the whole, it worked out.
Okay.
In that,
Did you get around, in other words, were you a political figure sitting in Pittsburgh, or were you getting out into the camps?
I went to Virginia.
Yeah.
I went
West
to
Virginia,
Clareton, Homestead.
You were operating in steel as well. You had
Oh,
contacts
sure.
amongst the
Oh,
company
sure.
unions and all that.
The, well, I'd say, what happened in coal had vibrations in steel,
Right.
see. And I have to mention this time the conversion into UMWA was becoming very effective. In steel, it was something else. In steel, we had the Steel Workers Union.
Well, the old amalgamated, I imagine.
No, I'm talking about the left wing.
Oh, I don't know about that, yeah. Okay.
You
You,
don't
had
know?
a
Yeah.
left comparison to the
Oh, sure.
over. But you were getting out in the field, and you were...
Oh, sure. I had
All right.
contact.
You went into all parts of western Pennsylvania, into
Kansas.
coal camp.
Yeah.
The strength, your strength, you keep at Cannonsburg, that area keeps cropping up.
Well,
Old District 5 of the
You start out of the old Liberty Tunnel,
Yeah.
going down the Monongahela.
Right. Yeah. You followed the old river road almost, huh?
That,
Okay.
it,
Did you go all the way into Vestalburg and some of those places?
Well, that was-
Clarksville and, or was that non-union country?
that's Vic Kamenovich's country.
Okay. Victim.
And he had a good following in that area. But
How would meetings be
Well-
conducted? Would they often be conducted in the native language and in English, or was everyone talking English?
English,
Okay.
English, broken,
Yeah.
but everybody.
But this was the ethnic country,
Oh,
right? This
sure.
was Slavs, Poles, Italian,
It
overwhelming in the working force. weren't
had
they?
to be.
Yeah. And then the blacks had been brought in and were now they'd been brought in different waves, generally.
Well, I can't. There are more blacks in steel
Okay,
than coal.
okay.
You know, on my contact with them. I was telling you about the Aliquippa
Yeah,
strike,
right.
and they shot up the picket line.
Mhm.
A couple were killed, and I remember when they buried them, steel workers, they wanted to, well, I say, demonstrate.
Mhm.
No one was allowed into the town. It wasn't by law. The thugs sealed off the town.
Exactly.
They sealed off the graveyard. I remember taking old Mother Bloor. No one, you know,
Yeah.
she had the guts.
Yeah.
She went up and spoke at that funeral service in the graveyard. And I remember that.
Did Mother Bloor function in Western Pennsylvania on other occasions with you?
Well,
Was it a rare thing?
rare thing.
Okay. What other kind of people? If Western Pennsylvania was that important and the miners, were men like William Z. Foster visitors there, or were they mostly?
Well, at that period, Foster was, well, I say he was temporarily on the shelf.
I see. How about, they tell me in West Virginia that in the 36 campaign, which is jumping a little bit,
Yeah.
but you were, I think, back out west by then,
Yeah.
that there were, you know, that to people like myself coming along later, it's hard to realize, you know, that in a small mining camp there could be huge mass meetings, you know, for the Communist
Well,
Party candidates.
Personally, my experience was in Turtle Creek, Westinghouse,
Okay.
and I won't say I did.
Mm-hmm.
The people we got together organized a very effective meeting for Earl Braddock.
Mm-hmm.
The auditorium was full.
Where was this auditorium?
Turtle Creek.
Now, this was essentially Westinghouse workers.
Yeah.
Are they yet organized? Is there a left organization? Is there a left trade
I haven't
union?
followed it lately.
Yeah, but it's
But
before the UE has organized.
And at that time, it was organized by the left-wing movement.
Mm-hmm. But it's some sample of what was going to break loose under the CIA.
Well, these people were hungry for organization.
Right.
They had, the old thing was to improve the status of life.
Right. You, the picture that I've seen with a very fine, black-haired, young-looking Jim Allender with Earl Browder.
Yeah,
That's out here
that's in Denver.
Oh, in Denver.
Yeah,
And you're already returned to your home in Colorado
that's right.
in 36 by then? You've left?
January
Okay.
36.
So
Yeah.
you're the leader of the communist campaign or whatever in an
District
organization.
organizer.
District organizer in
Colorado,
Okay.
Utah, New Mexico.
Oh, it was a multi-state.
Oh, sure, Wyoming.
Yeah.
4 states.
Sounds almost like the UMW district,
Yeah.
the way it was put together. We
Yeah,
modeled on
I
that.
had to follow it.
You had to follow it.
Geographically.
Yeah. What was it like? You'd been gone, you'd been abroad, you'd been in Western Pennsylvania. What was Colorado like when you returned in January 36? The Depression is still on strong. What's the mood of the workers out here compared to what you'd seen back there?
Well, I'll compare the miners. They'd been taken in to UMWA. Their lot was, well, I say better.
Mm-hmm.
Conditions had improved. I mean by that, in the underground, the working conditions, and some improvement in the pay. There's still plenty unemployed. The big thing, sore spot, was agriculture workers who are impoverished.
Mm-hmm.
The migratory worker. We had, what'll I say, no home, nothing permanent, floated from area to area. Relief was, well, I say, inadequate. I compare that to the early days of 19 31.
Mhm.
People had nothing. And that went for Denver and Salt Lake City.
Right.
And I could couple that with events in Sugar City, Utah. They called it a riot.
Where was this?
Sugar City,
Where?
outside of Salt Lake.
Mm-hmm. What happened there?
Well, protests for relief, demonstrations.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was the unemployed movement very important?
was
it when you got here, and was it in full bloom, or what?
well, what I'd say, it was what I term beginning of a state decline. You had WPA coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Some were dickering for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't pay much,
Mm-hmm.
but the old thing would rather work for what we get
Mm-hmm.
than it wasn't looked upon as charity.
Right. As you got out from Denver, what kinds of things did you encounter in the, what was going on in Trinidad and Walsenburg and Pueblo in 1936? For how many years were you around here then?
Well, number one, I went into New Mexico to, this is all worked out with Bob Miner, John L. Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
and that crowd.
Why is that? Explain what you mean to me.
I had the job
Yeah.
of getting out of prison the people like Juan Ochoa from the Gallup strike.
Oh, these were men sent for long prison terms.
Yeah.
After the
Gallup strike.
And the Gallup strike was in
34,
several
35.
years earlier. Okay.
Yeah, 35.
Now you say even Lewis was wanting to resolve that?
Well,
was that part of his deal?
this was a part of the deal to, I'd say,
win over the left to show
wash
them.
the linen
Yeah, okay.
and get
Who was the liaison in something like that with Lewis? You think Bob Miner? Who went to him?
Bob Miner.
Now, Bob Miner was a Texan originally, and when you met him, he's a formidable.
Well, I love Bob Miner.
Yeah, he was a no question, a likable character.
I love
an old labor cartoonist.
Yeah.
Remember, like
Yeah.
Art Young or something.
Yeah,
I always figured he might have been a better cartoonist. I don't mean to take away from political.
No, but
You know what I mean? He was a likable guy, and
well, that's what I liked about him.
yeah. A lot of the left people were not very likable people.
No, I traveled with him a bit, and I
you?
got knowing.
But he loved the Southwest, didn't he?
Oh, well, hell, we went up through Wyoming, and his wife, I forget her name, they were just,
Delightful people to be with, I guess, huh?
hell.
Now, let me see if I understand right, because this is fascinating and probably won't be in any of the Lewis,
Yeah.
official papers or
No.
biographies. But Lewis, by this point, is not wanting, say in the 34, 35, somewhere somebody contacted him. He's wanting to cool it with the
Yeah.
old National Miners Union people.
Yeah, he wanted to get them.
Because he's going to need them as organizers as he moves in on steel. He's farsighted, isn't he? No?
That
They're
part's
going to be the troops. They're going to work for nothing.
yeah.
Evidently, what, Miner, as Bob Miner told it to you, what, he approached Lewis or he was sent for?
Well,
contact
I
was
got
made?
this through
Yeah,
channels.
sure, okay. Well, tell me as you understand it.
My job was to get down, placate the UMWA.
You talking about District 15 here?
I'm talking about Gallup, yeah, District 15.
But you're speaking of, you didn't mean the officials here in 15.
Yes,
So you had to cool it with them and let them know you're their
I had to
friend.
get it.
Yeah.
Well, I got into this, and I remember having a conference with Frank Hefferly,
Yeah.
and
After you got back here.
yeah.
In 36.
so Hefferly, he was, you have to bear in mind, those socialists.
Most of them, they weren't
Yeah.
they, the District 15,
Yeah.
they were at least old.
Yeah, but he wasn't the kind, well, I say, you know that, except that, well, anyway, I had to make a deal with him.
Yeah.
So, what was the major grievance?
Yeah.
Oh, he had an organizer during that period by the name of Carl Howe. And they had control of a local outside of Gallup. So, to enforce their control, they stole the seal of the local. And,
You mean your own people had it?
yeah,
Okay.
I'll put it this way.
Yeah. These were good Mexican Americans for the most part?
Well,
Uh-huh.
Carl Howe wasn't.
No, but he was your organizer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
He was under you, in effect, in authority.
well, he
You hoped you could keep the authority over him, huh?
So I had promised Hefferly I would return that seal if he would intercede with the governor of New Mexico to grant a pardon or release.
You should have known that a seal meant more to the UNW. There's no big political issues beside the seal. They want the seal back, the king
Whatever
seal.
the seal.
Yeah, this is Lewis's authority all the
Yeah.
way down to the local.
So Hefferly agreed, and I went to Gallup,
Yeah.
and I met Hefferly's brother.
What was he doing then?
He was the organizer of UMWA.
Well, I see out here you had kin folks too, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. All nepotism.
Well, I didn't get very far with him because he was non-committal. He wouldn't do anything.
He was down there where the bitter battle was
Yeah.
with the left local, right?
And Frank hadn't told him anything.
Yeah.
Well, I told him the seal would be returned.
Yeah.
So I then tackled the problem of retrieving the seal.
Yeah.
Well, you have to know this guy, Carl Howe. They'd taken the damn thing out in an arroyo, buried it in...
You weren't. It wasn't an easy job. You'd promised a lot more than you could chew right then, huh?
Well, finally, with a little more than persuasion, Carl Howe agreed to retrieve the seal. So we got the seal. I returned it to Frank Hefferly,
Yeah.
and I reversed the whole thing. I've done my part, now you do yours. We did,
He did intercede with the governor.
yeah.
And those are always not too hard to work out after.
Yeah. So
Next roll.
there were three of them. I remember one. One we became very good friends. We still are.
Yeah, the old probably ILD used to visit these men anyway and keep contact, so they got the word. It would have helped in the communities when they got out that
Well,
promises had been kept. Maybe.
at that time it was negligible.
I see.
Yeah.
Did this help though in maintaining your own contacts with the Mexican American community when these guys came out, or in the Gallup situation?
Well, I went into Gallup, and people had been so terrorized and whatnot. You couldn't even go to the post office. The old system prevailed.
Yeah.
But there was one person, Tomsick, his wife and man, they didn't give a damn.
Yeah.
And I went in there with Harry Mavrogenis, a Greek.
Uh-huh.
And well, I say, we went to post office.
Yeah.
I wasn't bothered,
Yeah.
but all the dogs or
Yeah. Yellow dogs.
they were there,
Mhm.
and
By now it's a UMW local,
Oh.
but they still have got company down.
oh hell yes.
Was that typical, or was the domination receding already after the Union was organized? I don't mean at Pueblo whether it was steel.
It
or
was a
something.
carryover from the old. They
The
couldn't
fear
give.
was in the people, huh?
Oh, fear was in the people, and the powers that be, knew they weren't an authority, but they were still exercising it.
Yeah. That was an interesting period you describe, and what other examples of that is in which the Union has effectively broken the power, but it hasn't completed it. You know, the power could be broken if the workers
Well,
would act on their rights, but
If they had moved in, told them to go to hell,
right.
there wasn't a hell of a lot
No.
they could.
No, they really can't bulldoze like in the
No.
old days, but they're still, it's an uneasy.
Well, there was no work, so what the hell?
That was the issue, Ray. That you're putting your finger on it. When it's not a full 5-day work week and just occasional days, they're hungry and
Well, that was
they're
the
beholden. Seniority don't mean that much when they recall you.
condition
What are
prevailed.
you going to do? File a grievance
No.
because they didn't recall
There
you?
was nothing to go back to.
Well, how are things around? You know, you knew Trinidad, Walsenburg. You knew the coal camps from the Ludlow area. Well,
Yeah.
what was it like in there in '36 and the following years?
What'll I say? In the coal camps, there wasn't much because coal was,
Depressed.
it declined.
Mhm.
The only thing active was the Allen mine at Trinidad,
It's the only thing
CF&I.
left to this day.
Yeah,
CF&I's Allen
Yeah.
Mine is all there is. It's in Trinidad in
And,
1976.
in that period, steel was in focus. And Lewis was, what'll I say, he wasn't leaving anything untouched. He sent in Fontacchio from Chicago to set up, organizing the Pueblo
When
mill.
did he send him in? And when did he?
I would say in early part of 37.
What's the name again?
Fontacchio.
Yeah. One of the things that should not have surprised me, knowing the background around Ludlow, of the big Greek and Italian, was, but somehow I didn't relate it, when I went into Pueblo after the organization, was to find the core in what's a 50% Chicano or 60% Chicano, mills. The core leadership was Italian American, in that local. I didn't know, but I should have known.
Italian American, Slav.
But the real leadership, they happened to be the most aggressive people that held most of the offices were Italian business agents, Italian officers, mixed with Chicano. They were very active, the Italian.
That came in 38.
Yeah, I don't mean, this was much later when I got in there. I came in there on another matter and spent some days there. And I should have realized, it shouldn't have surprised me anymore in finding, say,
I'm reminiscing now.
Yeah, sure. I'm exchanging with
1930, there was an election campaign on.
Yeah.
We rented the hall opposite the steel mill.
Yeah. In 36?
Or no, this is going back in 1930.
Yeah.
And the hall was full.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the CFI moved in with their thugs.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't beat anybody, but they went out of there as meek as mice.
Those workers just left, you mean?
And they left.
Yeah.
And we were told to get out of town.
You know what that look means?
I never get through this.
We are through. We're going to come out and listen to Hetty's music, and then I want him to reminisce another time. But thanks a lot.
You're on?
Yeah, you're on. This is the 7th. We're now a day later, and it's June 17th.
Yeah.
You were going to tell me some other things. Go ahead, if you don't mind, and tell me your other recollections.
Well, I think an important event in that period was how the Steelworkers Organizing Committee come into being. And that was started months before by a few, what will I say, you couldn't classify them as militant, but determined individuals to organize a steel union. And through the efforts of Jim Egan, who was the president of the Steelworkers Union, which was an offshoot of the TUL, and at that time there was a change in the whole line.
What year? About 19...
I can vaguely remember 35.
Maybe late 34, leading into 35?
Yes.
Okay, prior to the formation of the Committee for Industrial.
And I recall these meetings, they had to be conducted, in tight secrecy, where the plans were laid, and out of Wheeling.
Some of the meetings in Wheeling?
One of the prime important meetings was there.
What was this called again?
Well, Committee of 10's what it started out.
Is this because there were 10 men, or what did they?
Well, there were 10 of them. They come from 10 different points.
But these were generally steel mills.
They were right out of the mills. The only people on that committee was working with it, Jack Johnstone, Jim Egan.
Now, Jack Johnstone was a communist.
He was district organizer of the Pittsburgh.
Was Egan as well, or was he connected with the left-wing steel union?
Well, he was president of the left-wing steel union.
Okay.
And they laid the whole plan that made possible.
You mean Foreign Organizing Drive and Steel?
Steelworkers Organizing Committee.
Mm-hmm. So that,
and
is
by
that
the-
what made it easier later, in your opinion, when the...
Well, I wouldn't-
and the SWOC?
say it made it easier, it made it possible,
Okay.
you see. The door was open. You had the key to the...
Were these men sometimes actually officials of the company representation?
Well,
plan?
one or two of them, I remember, long-standing had been,
Maybe presidents of their company?
well, grievance committee and whatnot of the,
But they were the key figures in their mills that could move the mills.
well, they, when they come to moving them into Steelworkers Union, they were a factor,
Yeah,
an important factor, you see. They opened the door,
yeah.
they,
But these were quite secret. In other words, what was going to appear a big, easy-going drive in steel later was...
well, all this had to be done, well, I'd say behind closed doors. There wasn't much publicity. Everything was a word of mouth.
Did you attend some of those meetings? Or did you...
No, I was in Pittsburgh, and they were held outside of Pittsburgh.
Your activities in
I
this period was
did.
mainly in the mine workers more than...
Well, I had some work with steel in Homestead. You know, it was still a bullpen in that sense. I
Did you
remember
have to go in and out of a town like Homestead?
I'd go in at night, and they'd meet me at a place, and we'd meet in groups, 2, 3, 4 people. Never,
Pretty far underground, and
never more than that.
there were always yellow dogs.
And,
or something, right?
I think you'll remember in that early period, Eleanor Roosevelt was going to speak on the post office
Yeah.
steps, and the mayor said he didn't give a damn with Jesus Christ. They weren't going to speak there, you know.
At
And
Homestead, wasn't it?
yeah, but I think that was a turning point that made it possible to bring the thing out in the open, see. And
When was that? About 34 that
Uh,
she came, or later?
I think it was 35, if I remember right. And, well, following that, things began to develop. The J&L mill in Pittsburgh, I did quite a bit of work there.
When you did
Yeah.
work, would you know, people today don't understand how tough that was and what it was like in those days. Were you again entering like a company town, or did you mean you would give out leaflets at the mill?
No, you give out leaflets. That
What
was
might the leaflets appeal to the workers on?
the thing you had to do was you'd meet with them. You not only discuss the value of organization, how to achieve organization, things of that sort. And I remember near Greensburg and whatnot, after the NMU had come into UMWA, they opened up the locals. I used to teach trade union classes, trade union history.
These would be UMW locals now.
They're not a local, they come openly to these classes.
Or let's say it's not a local meeting, but you're using the Union Hall.
Union
and
Hall.
anyone who wants to come attends the class.
They had the,
And if
I
your
did-
approach was that of a Marxist, this didn't bother anybody.
no,
It was
we
expected, more or less.
were talking history. We're talking the background of strikes,
Yeah.
the background of the movement, and what the future.
But is it fair to say that even though you were a loyal trade unionist, had a labor background, your approach was fairly political, and you were giving them a political understanding of these things as well, or was it more like pure parliamentary?
No, we were, what'll I say, talking the politics of the time. And you want to remember the New Deal was prevalent. That was,
Well, the left, the communist line at that point wasn't that strong for each measure of the New Deal, was it?
Well,
It was in flux, wasn't it?
yeah,
That period?
it points the NRA in that.
There was opposition NRA.
Yeah,
still
and,
opposition of the Wagner Act until later. They
Well,
didn't-
I say we discussed some of that with tongue in cheek.
Why do you say that? Explain.
Huh?
What do you mean?
Well, I'll put it this way. You didn't want to have, you couldn't come out and openly disillusion them,
Yeah.
but there were some things about it. Tell was the guy behind the NRA.
General Johnson. Hugh
Yeah,
Johnson, yeah.
Hugh Johnson. The whole thing is you couldn't tell the miners to swallow everything he was dishing out.
At the same time, if the party had serious doubts about some of it, they didn't always express all the doubts because they didn't want to have too big a gap maybe between them and the workers. Was that not always
Well,
true?
the big thing then was to unify
Yeah.
as many as possible, and you couldn't do it by nitpicking with the
Right.
NRA or that.
Right.
But you,
You weren't, for instance, going into Lewis's history and trying to be critical of him because you were trying to unify.
no,
You were
we,
supporting
I would say at that time we put our blinkers on, and you didn't live on the past. You were trying to develop
it.
a
Right.
movement for the present and future.
Now, who would generally come out? Would they be the old NMU guys in large numbers and some new faces as well? Who would come to your classes and trade?
Not the old timers so much, the younger people, and middle age would come. Of course, you'd get a few old timers out of the left wing movement. They were the backbone of pushing anything that would help, you know.
Did you have occasion, you've told us about the Committee of 10 in Steel, which was down in Wheeling and met in other places, I
Yes.
guess, in Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
It was a tri-state thing, I guess, that committee.
the whole steel area
Okay.
in there was involved.
But did you have occasion, either because you were with the National Miners Union or any other left-wing thing, to go into West Virginia ever in this period we're talking about?
Yes, I went down to Fairmont, but there wasn't much mining going on at that time.
You
Most-
felt there was less jobs there than there was up in
Yeah, you could. There were a few working up and down the river between Pittsburgh. I didn't go deep into West Virginia.
As far
at
as Fairmont.
Yeah. And had contact with a number of miners and whatnot, but they were unemployed.
It was more, the issues then were more of unemployment. How to deal with
Unemployment
the-
relief,
Yeah.
and then WPA,
Mhm.
to get
Yeah.
the benefits, WPA. That changed
Those
it.
issues in 34 and 35 were paramount almost compared to...
Well, that meant life and the existence of the people along that river going into Fairmont.
Do you ever remember
Clarksburg.
the developments like of the American Friends Service Committee, the Quaker efforts to have resettlement in Pennsylvania and at Arthurdale? Was any of that?
No,
You didn't participate
No.
in any of that?
No, I was involved to a big degree with the electrical workers at Westinghouse, steel workers, J&L, Aliquippa, and places like that weren't too far.
She's showing me an old photograph when people had short hair, all shaved off. Long.
Did you wear short hair?
Well, she's just showing me one,
Yeah.
where I was almost clipped back to
Yeah.
a half inch up here. She would have had almost no hair above her.
A GI haircut?
Yeah, that's like a GI haircut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that she cuts my hair,
Yeah.
now that it's somewhat longer, she cuts it all the time. Wouldn't know what to do with one of those clippers. Well, I appreciate you adding these recollections. I think you also told me the guy in Cleveland, what was his name that you told me? Tony,
Well, to get back into the Brophy
yeah.
period and the history of the NMU and say life in the coal camps you're talking about, particularly after that 32 strike. You see, that
Who
was
called the 32 strike? The NMU?
NMU. And while I wasn't directly involved, that came in after. The strike was very effective to begin with. It was one of those things that was carried, beyond.
Long, and then
Yeah,
it drifted
beyond.
back.
And
all that.
it split the miners. They had a house divided.
Became divisive after a
Yeah,
while,
and I think that was a serious mistake
yeah.
at that
Well,
time.
Heard
But
that.
one who could tell you a lot, if you can find him, is Tony Minorich.
Mhm.
And he edited the National Miners Union paper. I forget the name of it.
It came out maybe weekly or monthly.
Well, it came out when they had money to publish it. It's supposed to come out twice
Yeah.
a month.
You were telling me something else, if you remember, that was interesting. You were saying what it was like to be a left-wing organizer about 1930, which you maybe were. You were joking about making $10 or $20 a week, and you were saying how were they paid, or when you were in your recollection?
Well, hell, you didn't get paid. You're lucky you got bumped something to eat from
You had no salary.
and you hitchhike.
Yeah. And when you got to the next town, you were put up
You
by
had,
the workers there.
yeah, you had contact.
So if somebody was kind to you, they gave you a couple of bits and you headed for the next place.
Yeah, well, the big thing is, the people you're working with, no matter what they had on the table, you had to, they shared it with you. And that was a
That
big,
was riches too, wasn't it?
yeah, big thing in life,
Yeah. What are you speaking when you speak of that? This was the level of existence of both Communist Party organized and of National Miners Union, as far as you know, all those kind of people were
well,
pretty much unpaid volunteers.
I would say yes. Now, we get into a touch thing, like Egan, National Miners Union, or steel workers. He was supposed to get the subsidy and whatnot.
After he was like the national
Yeah.
president of the union,
They had a budget to operate.
he may or may not have made the
If he didn't-
$25 a week that was
Hey,
promised. didn't he?
Well, if it wasn't there, it wasn't there. They had to go on. Borich, an organizer,
Yeah, who is that? What was his whole name?
Frank Borich, he was
Was he a
Or-
key organizer for which one of the unions?
NMU,
Okay.
and he was part and parcel of the whole thing that helped transfer the NMU over to UMWA.
You think
Yeah.
men like that played a bigger role and is indicated in the histories where they, like, indicate within 3 to 6 weeks, the entire Appalachian coal fields, went from non-union to union? Do you think it was men like this bringing out the old NMU guys and turning them around?
No, I'd put it this
Or
way.
not? Or was
At
it
that
two of the
time-
forces?
Let's put it this way. It wouldn't have been possible for Lewis or any of them if there weren't a surge, a movement among the miners.
Weren't the miners really responding to Roosevelt being in the
Well,
whole
they-
change in their world?
The whole thing is there was a new hope. I'll put it new freedom,
Yeah.
and they were rallying, And I think the important thing that Boric and people like that, Kamenovich, did, were convincing the diehards that the route to go was to go into UMWA, unify the miners, and go in,
In other
forward.
words, the danger would have been that in the key Pennsylvania and other areas where they had influence, that Lewis might have wasted himself if they had held back the militants in such a surge, and instead they urged them in.
Well, a lot of the old militants and that said, "The hell with UMWA, we won't go back to it."
They fought it. It was the war was against UMWA. The
Yeah,
enemy
and
had deteriorated almost because they hated Lewis so bad.
And somebody had to go there and explain to them and convince them they were wrong. And the thing to do was pick up their marbles, go along with the rest of the miners, and help create a new force in the coal field. Hell with the
Do you
label.
think it did open doors? You described classes. Did you believe there was a surge? The UMW never did become a left force of any type, right?
No, but
As a result, you never really saw the years of effort of NMU towards the left, did you, in later years? Or did some of these guys become organizers in steel, come out of coal, and do other things that you know of?
Well, I think if you take in that period, Lewis accepted a lot of people that a few years before he would have turned thumbs down. The district people would have put the thugs on him, particularly in the West Virginia area. That was the last stronghold.
Yeah.
As the old.
You told me earlier when we weren't on the cassette that your feeling was that, like in West Virginia, and you named Tony T-Type,
Yeah.
remember, that you felt he was typical of this thuggery that had driven so many honest miners on the
Van Bittner carried on a bitter struggle right up to the end.
Yeah.
You see.
But you think in other districts they understood unity quicker, the way you described Heffley out here on Gallup and all?
Yeah, well, Phil Murray was an example there.
In what respect?
Well, there were a number of people that he hated, wouldn't have wasted time a day, but when it come to the period you're talking about, they all realized they had to sit down and eat from the same table.
So you're saying Van Bittner was almost the last diehard, not letting them join him
Yeah,
in organizing, whereas Phil Murray accepted them in steel and people that he would have fought a few years earlier.
There were a number of people like that around.
Well,
us.
they tell me, but I don't.
Yeah.
That actually people who had been open and known communists became some of the steelworkers' best organizers in
Well,
Ohio and elsewhere. But I don't know.
I wouldn't want to mention names today because, but some of them, as you say, were the best organizers CIO had. See,
Right.
and they come out of the left-wing movement. See,
Okay. One last thing before we run out of tape here is you were recalling, and I don't know that I heard it before, after dinner, as a child after the Ludlow massacre, you remember when Randy was asking you maybe about John D. Rockefeller or something, you were telling about your recollections as a child after Ludlow of what happened in that area.
well, that was after the Mackenzie King
Okay.
report and the formation of the yellow.
The employee representation plan,
yeah.
company.
After that was instituted, the CF&I plants. This had to be 1916 or
Okay,
something.
you're still a boy.
Yeah, and I'd be about 10 years old, 11
Okay.
years old. the Rockefellers come through on a goodwill tour, and the whole idea was to rally all the employees and miners. The whole thing behind it, demonstrate what good people the Rockefellers were.
And you, as a kid, what did you attend then?
Well, it was supposed to be a party for kids and the family, and
Where was it held?
this was in the YMCA in Walson Camp.
Okay.
You ought to remember they always had the YMCA behind them most
Yeah.
days. Well, anyway, I remember the meeting in the Rockefellers spoke. They were introduced by the company superintendent and all that, what good people they were. And the party turned out, we got a 3-cent candy bar.
Each kid got a 3-cent candy.
Well, if they were lucky, you know, they had to go through